In the shadowed corridors of Windsor Castle, where whispered secrets echo through centuries-old stone walls, one man's conscience would be tested beyond all limits. This is the extraordinary true story of Marcus Thompson, a decorated royal protection officer whose unwavering dedication to truth would pit him against the most powerful institution in Britain. For 23 years, Marcus had served the royal family with absolute discretion. He had seen their private moments, their human frailties, their deepest vulnerabilities. He had been trained to be invisible, to hear nothing, to speak of nothing. But when he stumbled upon a conversation that revealed a deception at the heart of the monarchy itself, his world would be turned upside down. This isn't just another royal scandal. This is the story of what happens when an ordinary man is forced to choose between his career, his family's security, and his moral compass. It's about the price of truth in a world built on carefully constructed images, and the courage it takes to speak truth to ultimate power. What Marcus discovered about Queen Camilla would challenge everything the public believed about the royal marriage, and his decision to act on this knowledge would set in motion a chain of events that would test the very limits of royal influence and the power of a single voice to change history. Are you ready to discover what really happened behind the palace walls? The truth that one brave guard risked everything to reveal. Marcus Thompson adjusted his earpiece one final time as he took his position outside the Queen's private study in Windsor Castle. The autumn rain drummed against the ancient windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what should have been another routine evening shift. At 45 years old, Marcus had spent more than half his adult life protecting the royal family, and he prided himself on being the kind of officer who noticed everything while appearing to see nothing at all. The corridors of Windsor Castle held countless secrets, and Marcus had learned early in his career that discretion wasn't just part of the job description, it was the foundation upon which the entire institution of monarchy rested. Tonight, however, that foundation would crack in ways he never could have imagined. Marcus had started his career as a young constable in the Metropolitan Police, fresh out of training and eager to make a difference. His father, William Thompson, had served as a palace groundskeeper for 30 years, instilling in his son a deep respect for tradition and duty. When the opportunity arose to join the Royal Protection Unit, Marcus saw it as the pinnacle of service, a chance to serve not just the law, but the crown itself. The early years had been challenging. The training was rigorous, both physically and mentally. Officers in the Royal Protection Unit underwent extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and continuous security clearances. They were taught to be human shields, to think 3 steps ahead of any potential threat, and above all, to maintain absolute confidentiality about everything they witnessed. Marcus excelled in this environment. His colleagues respected his professionalism, and the royal family came to trust him implicitly. He had protected Princess Diana during some of her most vulnerable moments, had stood guard during Prince William's teenage years, and had been present for countless private family gatherings that the public would never know about. Through it all, he maintained the invisible barrier that separated his professional duty from any personal feelings or judgments. His personal life had suffered for this dedication. His marriage to Sarah had ended in divorce after 15 years. Largely due to the demands of his job and his inability to share the stresses and experiences of his work life. His 2 children, Emma and James, now adults, had grown up with a father who was physically present but emotionally distant, trained by years of professional discretion to keep his thoughts and feelings locked away. Despite these personal costs, Marcus had never questioned his calling until the evening that would change everything. He had been assigned to the evening shift at Windsor Castle, where King Charles and Queen Camilla were hosting a private dinner for several government officials. It was a routine assignment: secure the perimeter, monitor communications, and ensure the safety of all participants. The dinner had concluded without incident, and the guests had departed. Marcus was conducting his final security sweep of the wing when he noticed a light still on in the Queen's private study. Protocol dictated that he should check to ensure the room was secure before completing his rounds. As he approached the door, he could hear voices from within. King Charles and Queen Camilla engaged in what appeared to be a private conversation. Training told him to move on, to respect their privacy, and simply note in his report that the royal couple was still awake and secure. But something in the tone of their voices stopped him. There was an urgency, a tension that seemed unusual for a typical evening conversation between husband and wife. Marcus positioned himself near the door, not to eavesdrop, but to maintain his security posture while being ready to respond if needed. The door was slightly ajar, and despite his best intentions, fragments of conversation reached his ears. What he heard would haunt him for months to come. "The public must never know," he heard Queen Camilla saying, her voice strained with emotion. "If this comes out, it will destroy everything we've worked for. The institution itself could collapse." King Charles's response was quieter, harder to distinguish, but Marcus caught enough to understand that they were discussing something that had happened years ago, something related to the early days of their relationship and its impact on the royal succession. As Marcus strained to understand more, he heard footsteps approaching from the opposite end of the corridor. Another security officer was making his rounds, and Marcus quickly moved away from the door, his mind racing with questions about what he had just overheard. The following days passed in a blur of confusion and internal conflict. Marcus found himself replaying the conversation over and over, trying to piece together its implications. His years of training had prepared him to forget what he heard, to file it away in the vault of royal secrets that every protection officer carried. But something about this conversation felt different, felt dangerous, in a way that went beyond typical royal privacy. Marcus began to notice things he had previously overlooked, the way certain staff members exchanged glances when discussing the Queen's schedule, the unusual number of private meetings between the king and his closest advisors, the subtle changes in security protocols that seemed designed to limit who had access to certain conversations and documents. His sleep became restless, filled with dreams of newspaper headlines and parliamentary inquiries. During his off-duty hours, he found himself researching the early history of Charles and Camilla's relationship, trying to understand what secret could be so devastating that its revelation might threaten the monarchy itself. The weight of this knowledge began to affect his work. His colleagues noticed his distraction, his unusual preoccupation with conversations and meetings that were normally routine. His supervisor, Chief Inspector Davidson, called him in for a performance review after other officers reported that Marcus seemed off his game. "Thompson, you've been with us for over 20 years, Davidson said, his weathered face showing genuine concern. "You're one of our most reliable officers, but lately you seem troubled. Is there something you need to discuss?" Marcus sat across from his supervisor, knowing that this was his opportunity to share his burden, to seek guidance from someone who understood the complexities of royal service. But he also knew that revealing what he had heard could end his career and potentially put him in legal jeopardy under the Official Secrets Act. "I'm fine, sir," Marcus replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served him well throughout his career. "Just some personal matters I'm working through. Nothing that will affect my duty." Davidson studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. But remember, Thompson, we're here to protect and serve, not to question or judge. That's what keeps this institution stable and allows us to do our jobs effectively." As Marcus left the meeting, Davidson's words echoed in his mind. Protect and serve, not question or judge. But what happened when protecting the institution meant protecting a lie? What happened when serving the crown meant enabling a deception that could have far-reaching consequences for the British people? That evening, Marcus found himself walking through Hyde Park, a habit he had developed during times of stress. The park was nearly empty, the autumn air crisp and clear. As he walked, he thought about his father, who had spent his entire career maintaining the palace grounds with meticulous care and unwavering loyalty. William Thompson had raised his son to believe that service to the crown was one of the highest forms of patriotism, that the royal family represented continuity and stability in an ever-changing world. But his father had also taught him about integrity, about the importance of truth and honesty in all aspects of life. These two principles, which had coexisted peacefully throughout Marcus's career, were now in direct conflict. As he sat on a bench overlooking the Serpentine, Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He would seek to understand more about what he had overheard, not to betray the royal family, but to determine whether his duty to protect them included protecting a secret that might be fundamentally wrong. The next morning, Marcus began his own quiet investigation. He used his security clearance to access historical records, personnel files, and communications logs from the period when Charles and Camilla's relationship had begun. What he discovered in those files would test every principle he had lived by and force him to choose between his loyalty to the institution and his loyalty to the truth. The archive rooms beneath Windsor Castle were a labyrinth of history, containing centuries of royal correspondence, official documents, and records that formed the backbone of the monarchy's institutional memory. Marcus had legitimate access to these areas as part of his security duties, but as he descended the stone steps on a quiet Tuesday morning, he felt like an intruder in his own workplace. His investigation began with official correspondence from the 1990s, the period when Prince Charles's marriage to Princess Diana was falling apart and his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles was becoming increasingly public. Marcus had been a junior officer during those tumultuous years, focused on immediate security concerns rather than the political and personal dramas unfolding around him. The first files he examined contained routine security reports and scheduling documents. Nothing seemed unusual until he noticed discrepancies in the dating of certain meetings and communications. According to the official records, Charles and Camilla's romantic relationship had resumed in 1986, 5 years after his marriage to Diana. However, the security logs told a different story. Marcus found records of secret meetings that predated the official timeline by several years. Phone logs, security arrangements for private rendezvous, and travel records that suggested the relationship had never really ended, even during the early years of Charles's marriage to Diana. While this information was certainly scandalous, it wasn't necessarily the earth-shattering secret he had heard Camilla refer to in their private conversation. As he delved deeper into the files, Marcus discovered a series of communications between senior royal advisors and government officials from 1992, the year Charles and Diana's marital problems became public knowledge. These documents revealed discussions about damage control and maintaining constitutional stability that went far beyond typical media management. One particular memo caught his attention. Written by the Queen's private secretary to the Prime Minister's office, it outlined potential constitutional implications of the Wales marriage breakdown and specifically mentioned questions of legitimacy that could arise. The language was carefully coded, but Marcus's years of reading royal communications allowed him to understand the subtext. The memo suggested that there were concerns about the legitimacy of Prince William and Prince Harry's positions in the line of succession. Initially, Marcus assumed this referred to the impact of their parents' divorce on their royal status. However, as he continued reading, he found references to genetic verification and paternity confirmation that suggested something far more serious. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened a classified file dated from 1995. Inside, he found medical records, DNA test results, and correspondence between the Queen's physicians and senior palace officials. The documents were heavily redacted, but the implications were clear. There had been questions about Prince Harry's paternity, questions serious enough to require official genetic testing. The test results confirmed what the palace had publicly maintained, that Prince Charles was indeed Harry's biological father. But the very existence of these tests revealed that there had been significant doubt serious enough to threaten the constitutional order. The correspondence made it clear that this information was to be buried permanently, known only to a handful of senior officials and sealed under the Official Secrets Act. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery in the file. Marcus found evidence that Queen Camilla, then Camilla Parker Bowles, had been aware of these paternity questions and had actually encouraged the testing. More disturbing still, the documents suggested that she had threatened to reveal damaging information about the royal family if her relationship with Charles wasn't legitimized and protected. A letter from Camilla to a senior palace official, dated 6 months before Diana's death, outlined her knowledge of various royal secrets and her willingness to ensure they remained private, in exchange for appropriate recognition and protection. The letter was carefully worded to avoid direct threats, but its meaning was unmistakable. Camilla had used her insider knowledge to secure her position within the royal hierarchy. Marcus sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what he had discovered. The conversation he had overheard between Charles and Camilla wasn't about protecting the institution from scandal. It was about protecting themselves from the consequences of years of manipulation and blackmail. As he continued reading, Marcus found evidence that went beyond personal relationships to matters of national security. Documents showed that Camilla had been in contact with several foreign dignitaries and business leaders during the 90s, sharing information about royal schedules, family dynamics, and even government policies. While there was no evidence of deliberate espionage, the casual sharing of sensitive information represented a serious breach of national security protocols. The most damning evidence came in the form of recorded phone conversations between Camilla and a wealthy American businessman with suspected ties to foreign intelligence services. The recordings, made as part of a routine security investigation, captured Camilla discussing private royal family matters and even speculating about future government policies based on her conversations with Charles. These recordings had been buried, and the investigation had been quietly closed, without action. The official justification was that Camilla was not yet a member of the royal family and therefore not subject to the same security restrictions. However, Marcus could see that the real reason was fear of the scandal that would result if her conduct became public knowledge. As Marcus assembled the pieces of this conspiracy, he realized that Camilla's elevation to queen consort wasn't just a personal triumph. It was the culmination of a decades-long campaign of manipulation that had compromised the integrity of the monarchy itself. The institution that he had dedicated his life to protecting had been infiltrated and corrupted by someone who had used blackmail and coercion to achieve her goals. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Marcus like a physical burden. Every day that he stood guard, every time he saluted the royal standard, every moment of his service felt like participation in a massive deception. He began to question not just Camilla's legitimacy as queen, but the entire foundation of royal authority that rested on public trust and constitutional precedent. His personal crisis deepened when he realized that his own father had likely known at least part of this story. William Thompson's sudden early retirement from royal service in 1997, shortly after Diana's death, had never been fully explained. Marcus found his father's name in several security reports from that period, indicating that he had been part of the team responsible for handling sensitive documents and communications. Marcus arranged to visit his father, now 73 and living in a small cottage in Hampshire. The old man welcomed his son warmly, but Marcus could see a wariness in his eyes when the conversation turned to their shared service to the crown. "Dad, I need to ask you about something," Marcus said as they sat in the modest living room filled with mementos of royal service. "About why you really retired when you did." William Thompson was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folding and unfolding on his lap. "Some things are best left buried, son. Some secrets are too dangerous for good people to carry. But what if those secrets are protecting people who don't deserve protection? What if keeping quiet means enabling something fundamentally wrong?" The old man looked at his son with eyes that had seen too much. "Marcus, I know you think you've discovered something that changes everything. But ask yourself this: what good would come from digging it up? Who would benefit from the chaos that would follow?" "The truth should benefit everyone," Marcus replied. But even as he said it, he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "The truth," his father said sadly, "is often the enemy of peace and stability. Sometimes a beautiful lie serves the people better than an ugly truth." As Marcus drove home from his father's house, he carried not just the burden of what he had discovered, but the weight of his father's resignation and disappointment. The older man had faced the same choice decades ago and had decided that silence was the price of stability. But Marcus wasn't sure he could make the same choice. The evidence he had gathered painted a picture of systematic deception and manipulation that went to the heart of the monarchy's legitimacy. Queen Camilla hadn't just married into the royal family. She had blackmailed her way into it, using secrets and threats to overcome the institution's resistance to her presence. The question that haunted Marcus as he returned to his duties was whether his loyalty to the crown required him to protect this deception or to expose it. The answer would determine not just his future, but potentially the future of the British monarchy itself. The burden of knowledge was transforming Marcus Thompson into someone he barely recognized. 3 weeks after his discovery in the royal archives, he found himself unable to perform his duties with the same unconscious professionalism that had defined his career. Every interaction with Queen Camilla felt like a betrayal of his principles. Every moment of protection like complicity in an ongoing deception. Marcus had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize, to separate his personal feelings from his professional obligations. But the evidence he had uncovered created a moral crisis that no amount of training could resolve. He began to notice things about Camilla's behavior that he had previously dismissed as royal privilege: the way she spoke to staff members with casual cruelty, the manner in which she manipulated conversations to gather information, and most disturbing of all, the subtle threats that seemed to underlie her interactions with anyone who might pose a challenge to her position. The breaking point came during a private dinner party at Clarence's house, where Marcus was assigned to security detail for an intimate gathering of government ministers and foreign diplomats. The guest list itself was unusual. It included several individuals who had no obvious connection to royal duties, but who all shared ties to various intelligence agencies and international business interests that had figured in Marcus's investigation. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself positioned near the dining room, where he could observe the interactions without appearing to eavesdrop. What he witnessed was a masterclass in manipulation and information gathering. Queen Camilla moved through the room like a skilled intelligence operative, drawing out sensitive information from government officials, gathering insights about international negotiations, and subtly probing for details about ongoing security operations. The most shocking moment came when Marcus overheard a conversation between Camilla and the foreign secretary about upcoming trade negotiations with China. Camilla's questions were far more sophisticated than those of someone with casual interest. She displayed detailed knowledge of classified negotiation strategies and seemed particularly interested in information that would be valuable to certain foreign business interests. When the foreign secretary made a comment about keeping certain aspects of the negotiations private, Camilla's response chilled Marcus to the bone. "Oh, you know how secrets have a way of coming out," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Especially when people aren't as careful as they should be about protecting the crown's interests." The implicit threat was unmistakable, and Marcus could see the foreign secretary's discomfort as he quickly changed the subject. This wasn't casual conversation. It was extortion disguised as royal privilege. After the dinner, Marcus remained at his post as the staff cleaned up and the security team conducted their final sweep. As he stood in the corridor outside Camilla's private office, he heard her making a phone call that confirmed his worst fears. "The information you requested will be available tomorrow," she was saying to someone on the other end. "The trade delegation's private positions on the mineral rights negotiations, as well as the government's fallback strategy if the initial talks fail. Yes, I understand the timeline is important. You'll have everything you need." Marcus felt sick as he realized what he was hearing. Queen Camilla wasn't just using her position to gather sensitive government information. She was actively selling it to unknown parties who were likely representing foreign interests. The woman who had manipulated her way to the throne was now using that position to betray the very country she was supposed to serve. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. He arranged to meet with Janet Morrison, an investigative journalist with The Guardian who had built a reputation for exposing government corruption and had the courage to take on powerful institutions. Morrison had previously investigated royal finances and had demonstrated the kind of meticulous attention to detail that Marcus knew would be necessary to handle the explosive information he was prepared to share. They met at a small cafe in Bloomsbury, chosen for its anonymity and distance from royal residences. Marcus arrived early, his nerves on edge as he waited for Morrison to appear. When she finally entered the cafe, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair and an air of professional competence, Marcus felt a moment of panic about what he was about to do. "Mr. Thompson," Morrison said as she sat down across from him, "I understand you have information about the royal family that you believe the public should know." Marcus had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words seemed inadequate to convey the magnitude of what he had discovered. "What I'm about to tell you could bring down the monarchy," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could see the intensity in her eyes as he began to outline his discoveries. He started with the paternity questions surrounding Prince Harry, explaining how the secret DNA testing had been conducted and covered up. He described Camilla's use of this information to secure her position within the royal hierarchy and her ongoing manipulation of sensitive government intelligence. As Marcus spoke, Morrison took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Her questions were precise and professional, designed to verify the credibility of his claims without compromising the security of her source. "Mr. Thompson," she said after he had finished his initial account, "what you're describing amounts to treason on the part of Queen Camilla and potential complicity by King Charles. Are you absolutely certain about the evidence you've seen?" Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a small flash drive. "I've copied the relevant documents. Everything is here. The DNA test results, the correspondence about Harry's paternity, the recordings of Camilla's conversations with foreign contacts, and the security reports that show her pattern of information gathering and sharing." Morrison accepted the drive, but didn't immediately plug it into her laptop. "Before I look at this, I need you to understand what you're asking me to do. If this information is published, it will likely mean the end of the current monarchy, possible criminal charges for Queen Camilla, and a constitutional crisis that could destabilize the government. Are you prepared for those consequences?" Marcus had asked himself this question countless times over the past weeks. The weight of potentially destroying an institution that had existed for over 1,000 years was almost unbearable. But the alternative, allowing a corrupt and treasonous individual to continue occupying one of the most powerful positions in the country, seemed even worse. "I became a protection officer because I believed in service to the crown," Marcus replied. "But the crown is supposed to represent the people of Britain, not betray them. If Queen Camilla is using her position to undermine national security and sell government secrets, then exposing her isn't an attack on the monarchy. It's an attempt to save it." Morrison studied his face for a long moment before nodding. "I'll need time to verify this information independently. If what you've shown me is accurate, it will take weeks or possibly months to build a case that will survive legal challenges. Are you prepared to testify publicly if necessary?" The thought of appearing in court, of having his name forever associated with the downfall of the royal family, terrified Marcus, but he also knew that his silence had become impossible. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary." Over the following weeks, Morrison worked with a team of forensic journalists and legal experts to verify Marcus's claims. The process was painstaking and dangerous. Several times, Morrison reported that she felt she was being followed and there were mysterious break-ins at her office and home that seemed designed to intimidate rather than steal. Marcus continued his duties at the palace, but the strain was becoming unbearable. He found himself watching Queen Camilla with a mixture of disgust and fascination, amazed by her ability to maintain a public facade of royal dignity while engaging in systematic betrayal of the country she was supposed to serve. The pressure intensified when Chief Inspector Davidson called Marcus into his office for another meeting. This time, Davidson's expression was serious, and Marcus could sense that his investigation had been discovered. "Thompson, I've been getting some unusual reports about your recent activities," Davidson began, his voice carefully neutral. "There have been questions about your access to certain archive materials and concerns about your general conduct. I need you to understand that any breach of the Official Secrets Act would be treated with the utmost seriousness." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that his investigation had been detected. The royal security apparatus was closing ranks, and he was being warned to back down before he crossed a line that would make him a criminal rather than a whistleblower. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're referring to," Marcus replied, trying to maintain his composure. "I've conducted my duties exactly as trained and have followed all security protocols." Davidson leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent his career reading people and situations. "Marcus, you've been a loyal officer for over 20 years. Don't throw that away for something that's bigger than any of us. Some truths are too dangerous to pursue." As Marcus left the meeting, he realized that he was now racing against time. The palace security apparatus was aware of his investigation and would soon move to silence him permanently. His only protection was to ensure that the information he had gathered reached the public before he could be arrested or discredited. That evening, Marcus called Janet Morrison from a secure phone and delivered a message that would set in motion the final phase of their dangerous game. "The story needs to be published immediately. They know what we're doing, and I don't think either of us has much time left." The night before The Guardian was scheduled to publish Marcus Thompson's explosive revelations, London felt like a city holding its breath. Janet Morrison and her editorial team had worked around the clock for the past 72 hours, verifying documents, cross-referencing sources, and building a legal defense that would withstand the inevitable challenge from royal lawyers. The story that would emerge the next morning would be devastating in its precision and unassailable in its documentation. Marcus spent that final night in a safe house arranged by Morrison's newspaper, knowing that once the story broke, his life as he had known it would be over. He sat by the window of the small flat in East London, watching ordinary people go about their evening routines, unaware that by morning their understanding of their monarchy would be forever changed. At exactly 6 a.m. on a crisp November morning, The Guardian's website published the most significant royal scandal in modern British history. The headline read, "Treason in the Palace: How Queen Camilla blackmailed her way to the throne and betrayed Britain's secrets." The article, which ran to over 8,000 words, methodically detailed every aspect of Marcus's investigation. Supported by photocopies of original documents and authenticated recordings, the public reaction was immediate and seismic. Within hours, the story had been picked up by every major news organization in the world. The British pound plummeted on international markets as investors grappled with the implications of a constitutional monarchy in crisis. Emergency sessions were called in Parliament, and the Archbishop of Canterbury issued a statement expressing grave concern about the allegations. But the most dramatic response came from within the royal household itself. King Charles, faced with incontrovertible evidence of his wife's treachery, was forced to confront the reality that his marriage and his throne had been built on deception and betrayal. The private conversations that followed, witnessed by senior palace staff and later leaked to the press, revealed a monarch in complete emotional collapse. "How could you do this to me? How could you do this to the crown?" Charles was heard shouting during a confrontation with Camilla that echoed through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Palace staff reported that furniture was thrown, valuable antiques were smashed, and security officers had to intervene to prevent physical violence. Queen Camilla's response to the exposure was characteristic of the calculating intelligence that had served her for so long. Rather than denying the allegations or expressing remorse, she immediately went on the offensive, claiming that she had been acting as an unofficial intelligence asset for the British government and that her information gathering had been sanctioned at the highest levels. This defense strategy backfired spectacularly when current and former intelligence officials publicly denied any knowledge of Camilla's activities. The head of MI6 issued an unprecedented public statement clarifying that Queen Camilla had never been an authorized intelligence asset, and that her activities, as described in the Guardian article, constituted serious breaches of national security. As the scandal deepened, other revelations began to surface. Former palace staff members, emboldened by Marcus's courage, came forward with their own accounts of Queen Camilla's manipulative behavior and questionable activities. A picture emerged of systematic abuse of royal privilege that extended far beyond the specific allegations in the original article. The most damaging testimony came from Margaret Fairfax, a former lady-in-waiting who had served Queen Camilla for 5 years before resigning under mysterious circumstances. Fairfax revealed that she had been required to facilitate meetings between the Queen and foreign contacts, to arrange for the transfer of sensitive documents, and to maintain secret communication channels that bypassed normal palace security protocols. "I thought I was serving the crown," Fairfax told a packed press conference, her voice shaking with emotion. "Instead, I was helping to betray it. The guilt has haunted me for years, but I was too frightened to speak out. Mr. Thompson's courage has given all of us the strength to tell the truth." The legal ramifications of the scandal moved swiftly. Within a week of the story's publication, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that it was launching a formal investigation into allegations of treason, conspiracy, and violations of the Official Secrets Act. Queen Camilla's passport was confiscated, and she was placed under house arrest at Clarence House while investigators seized computers, documents, and communication devices. The political impact was equally dramatic. The Prime Minister, facing calls for his resignation over his government's failure to detect Queen Camilla's activities, announced that he would be establishing a parliamentary commission to investigate the security implications of the scandal. Opposition leaders demanded a complete review of the monarchy's constitutional role and called for new oversight mechanisms to prevent future abuses of royal privilege. King Charles, meanwhile, faced the most difficult decision of his life: Legal experts made it clear that his position as monarch was sustainable only if he took decisive action to distance himself from his wife's crimes. The constitutional principle that the king can do no wrong provided some protection, but only if he demonstrated that he had been unaware of and uninvolved in Queen Camilla's activities. The turning point came when investigators discovered that King Charles had, in fact, been aware of at least some of his wife's questionable activities. Recorded phone conversations revealed that he had known about her information gathering and had failed to report it to appropriate authorities. While this didn't rise to the level of criminal complicity, it fatally compromised his moral authority as monarch. On December 15th, exactly 6 weeks after Marcus Thompson's revelations had been published, King Charles appeared on national television to announce his abdication. Speaking from Windsor Castle, his voice breaking with emotion, he accepted full responsibility for the crisis and announced that he would be stepping down immediately to allow the monarchy to begin the process of rebuilding public trust. "I have devoted my life to service of the crown and the British people," Charles said, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime's dedication. "But I have failed in my most fundamental duty, to protect the integrity of the institution I was born to serve. I cannot remain as king knowing that my personal failures have brought such shame upon the monarchy." The announcement sent shockwaves around the world and triggered the most significant constitutional crisis in British history. Prince William, who had been groomed for eventual succession but not for immediate kingship, found himself thrust onto the throne during the most challenging period the monarchy had faced in centuries. Queen Camilla's trial began 3 months later and became a global media sensation. The evidence presented by prosecutors, based largely on the documents that Marcus Thompson had courageously brought forward, painted a devastating picture of systematic betrayal that spanned decades. Expert witnesses testified that the intelligence she had shared with foreign contacts had compromised ongoing British operations and had potentially cost lives. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Marcus himself took the witness stand. Facing hostile cross-examination from Camilla's high-powered legal team, he maintained his composure and his conviction that exposing the truth had been his patriotic duty. "I took an oath to protect the crown," Marcus testified, his voice clear and strong. "But the crown is not just a person or a building. It's an institution that represents the British people and their values. When that institution is corrupted from within, protecting it means exposing that corruption, no matter how painful the consequences might be." Queen Camilla was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of treason and conspiracy. The judge, in handing down a sentence of life imprisonment, noted that her crimes represented one of the most serious betrayals of public trust in British history, and that the damage to national security and constitutional order would take years to repair. Marcus Thompson's life was forever changed by his decision to speak truth to power. He was dismissed from royal service and faced years of legal challenges and personal threats from supporters of the former queen. But he also became a symbol of courage and integrity, inspiring a new generation of whistleblowers and public servants who understood that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to challenge authority. The monarchy itself survived the crisis, but in a fundamentally transformed state. New laws were enacted requiring detailed background checks for anyone marrying into the royal family, and oversight mechanisms were established to monitor royal communications and activities. Public trust, while damaged, began to slowly rebuild under King William V, who made transparency and accountability central themes of his reign. In the years that followed, historians would debate whether Marcus Thompson had saved or destroyed the British monarchy. What was indisputable was that his courage had prevented a corrupt individual from continuing to exploit one of the most powerful positions in the country, and had demonstrated that no one, not even a queen, was above the law. The final chapter of this extraordinary story came 5 years later, when Marcus Thompson was awarded the George Cross for his service to the nation. As he received the medal from King William V in a private ceremony, the young monarch spoke words that captured the profound transformation that had taken place. "Mr. Thompson, your loyalty to the true meaning of the crown, rather than to its temporary occupants, has reminded us all of what service really means. The monarchy is stronger today because you had the courage to hold it accountable to its highest ideals." Marcus Thompson's story became a defining moment in British constitutional history. proof that democracy and accountability could survive even the most devastating challenges to established institutions. His decision to risk everything for the truth had not destroyed the monarchy, it had purified it, ensuring that future generations would inherit an institution worthy of their loyalty and respect. The brave guard who dared to tell King Charles the truth about Camilla had ultimately saved both the crown and the country, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is the courage to expose betrayal, no matter how high it reaches or how painful the consequences might be.